All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'll call the meeting to order today. I will mention that I'm sitting in my first meeting here as the president of the board. I want to say thank you again to Bob for his many years of service as the president and for his continued help in guiding me on this as I endeavor in this. So I apologize in advance as I'm learning the ropes here and will do my best. So thank you all for being here. We'll do roll call. Secretary
Sure.
Goldberg.
Miniterando,
Sure.
Epstein,
Present.
Schroeder,
Here.
Tucker, not here yet. Dornbrook here. 4 out of
Alright.
5.
Announcements. Eric.
Just like to welcome everybody to the first meeting of 2025 of the board. If you're on Zoom, please use the raise your hand function. If you're physically in the audience, please go to the podium to speak. And to all our Serbian friends in Amador County, I'd like to wish them a Merry Christmas coming up here next week.
All right. Move on to agenda item number 4, corrections to the agenda or consent calendar. Does anyone have any corrections?
No.
All right. Seeing none, move on to number 5. Comments from the audience. As a reminder, this is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on any non-agenda items that are within the subject matter of the district. We can't take action or discuss the matters that are not listed on the agenda per the Brown Act. I don't see anyone in the audience here physically. Eric, do you have any hands up?
There are no hands up.
Okay, seeing no hands, we'll move on to number 6, written comments from the public. Eric, I did not see anything in the packet.
There was none.
Okay. We'll move on to agenda item number 7, adoption of the consent calendar. This includes 3 items: the approval of the board meeting minutes from December 6th, the approval of the concurrent consent for claims, and a review of the receivables and shutoffs report.
I move that we adopt the consent calendar.
Thank you.
Dornbrook, I'll second that.
right.
We have to do a voice vote, roll call vote.
We do not have to do a roll call
No,
vote.
sir.
There's
We're all
no board
here.
member. I don't believe there's a board member. There is no board member via Zoom, so it'll just be a voice vote.
All right, so I would say, I can,
Okay, fine.
You got it easy today, Peter.
Yeah. It makes the difference.
so then that's me. That's okay.
You just say all in
Okay,
favor.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right,
And then the absent.
and we have 1 absent. Thank you. Okay. Nothing to do for number 8 since no items brought forward them. So we'll move on to agenda item number 9, items for board action. We'll start with the FY 23-24 audit, agenda item 9A.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, Olga, so you can share yours.
Sounds great. Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Okay, if someone can confirm for me that we can see the screen.
We can
You
see
can't
it.
see it.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Okay, so we completed the audit of the 2024 financial results for the June 30, 2024 year ended. And today we have the results of that audit for you here. First and foremost, the auditor reports that we issued, we issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. The unmodified report is a clean opinion. It's exactly what you want. It means that the financial statements are presented in accordance with the applicable accounting pronouncements, which are GASB pronouncements for the district, and have been prepared following the standard accounting practices and processes. The report we issued was under government auditing standards as well, which requires us to issue a report on internal control related to financial reporting preparation. So the process to compile information for year-end reporting in an annual report. That report does identify 1 matter that we classified as material weakness due to some controls breakdown in preparation for the annual financial statements. And I'll cover that in just a little bit later in my presentation. And then the third letter that we issued is the letter required by RUS. It's called a management letter, but it's another compliance report that they require based on the lending arrangement that the district has with RUS. All right, some of the matters that we're required to bring to your attention based on our auditing standards that we follow in performing the audit. The first one is bringing to your attention the significant accounting policies that are outlined in footnote 1 to the financial statements. Generally spells out the accounting policies that the district followed for things like revenue recognition, how is cash defined, and things of that nature. It also includes policies related to management estimates. These are generally policies that are based on management's knowledge of operations of the entity, analyzing historical trends and just some other information that management has that we cannot necessarily verify through a third-party audit procedure such as confirmation. So we generally pay quite a bit more attention to these management estimates in the financial statements. I do have to say that the estimates the district uses are very standard for similar type entities. Generally setting allowance for doubtful accounts receivables or depreciable life of capital assets, some actuarial assumptions for determination of post-employment benefit and pension benefit obligations and things of that nature. So not unusual management estimates for the district. So nothing out of the ordinary there. We do evaluate all of the accounting policies, making sure, once again, they're in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We do have to let you know if we had any significant difficulties in performing our audit, and I'm pleased to report that we did not have significant difficulties. We did have a delay in timing in getting last year due to some turnover in staff. There was some delay in just getting information to us for the audit, but once we received it, there were no issues or there were no disagreements with respect to the information that was provided or how the transactions were recorded. So no disagreements, no difficulties other than just slight timing delay. Another matter that we identified any significant audit adjustments that were required to be reflected in audited financial statements or those that management chose not to reflect in the financial statements based on materiality or other assumptions. There were quite a few audit journal entries that we identified as part of the audit that are reflected in the final audit report. We didn't include the entire list here, but a lot of those entries were related to making sure that balances are correctly reflected for each fund that the district has. So as well as government type activity.
Can we just pause for a second?
So we do look not only.
Olga?
Yes.
Oh, there's a
Question?
it's saying your internet connection is unstable. So we
Okay.
missed a bit of that. Could we just back up to probably the AGEs starting with the
Let's try.
2018?
Is it possible to move the screen closer? I find it unreadable and I can't zoom in.
Maybe you might turn off your camera just to get more bandwidth.
My connection on Zoom is also falling
I
Why
will
are you on Zoom?
because I
try
can't
to do
read
that.
that. Could we,
Um,
may I move it closer or?
I think it might be on our end.
You could sit in the front row.
Okay. No, and maybe today. So
No.
we'll try
Can you
that.
read it?
No. But I've got different.
No.
I mean,
This is our first time seeing it. And I can't read it. You can't read it.
well, yeah. If you want, why don't you just
Yeah.
sit in the front row for
Which would you prefer?
I think we're having trouble reading the zoomed ability on the PowerPoint here. Is there a way
Okay, yeah,
for us
it's
to-
just a summary of what's in the audit. There's nothing in here that's not in the
No,
audit.
this is not in the packet,
No, this is a summary of what's in the audit.
but it's the auditor's, the closest we have to an auditor's statement. So it. This is
No,
the
the
first time-
audit is the auditor statement. This is just a summary of that. Olga, are you
Eric,
hearing
there's
us at
no letter
all?
from the auditor in the board packet, and so there is no auditor's statement other than the financials themselves. It's conspicuously absent. This is my first time seeing it.
Olga, are you hearing us at all?
I
That's what-
do, yes,
this
I
is
do
written
hear
on
this.
this-
We
on
can
the
share this
screen.
presentation with
That's
the
what's on
board
the screen.
members.
You could-
I'm now up. The problem is that my Zoom goes up and down, but I'll
Oh,
just
okay.
manage, and if I have to, I'll go sit in the front row seat.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem.
But there's been no mention of journaling entries or lateness or anything until now.
You want to continue, Olga, or?
We are happy to share the copy of this presentation after, or do, at some point, Eric, this can be made available to the board members.
Thank you.
May I interrupt to ask, and I apologize for being late, snow and a slip and fall. The finance committee has seen all of this, I assume, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That
I
is
do wanna-
correct.
I do want to reiterate that for others on the board, correct me if I'm wrong, this is first time seeing, so thank you very much.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. All right. Okay. So the journal entries that were posted to the audited financial statements that are reflected in audited financial statements. There were a number of those. Many of those were related to proper allocation of tax revenues and expenses between the different funds within the district. As I mentioned, the report that we issue covers business type activities, general fund activities, or government type activities, as well as a district as a whole. So we want to make sure that every one of those funds that you're seeing in the draft annual report that's in front of you is correctly reflected. So many of these adjusted entries were related to that allocation from the original trial balance that we were provided. We, as part of the audit, were identifying those
We'll stop our video, see if that helps.
So this is not all of the journal entries that were corrected, but just some of the more material ones that we wanted to bring to your attention. So for example, one of the correcting adjusting entries was related to accrual of a payable on a CIP project. So this is related to the wastewater project. There was an invoice that was received in July, but for services provided by the contractor before June 30th. So that was not accrued at the end of the year. So it is now reflected. That was one of the adjusting journal entries. Another one was related to Mello-Roos payment. The Mello-Roos funding is reflected in the annual report as a fiduciary fund. So it needed to be moved out of general fund and into that fiduciary fund for the proceeds that were received during the year. So that was another journal entry to make sure that the balances are recorded in correct buckets in the financial statements. And then another entry was related to property tax allocation that's done internally every year between business type activities and governmental type activities based on just kind of year-end results. So that was another entry that was recorded. So these are some of the larger ones of the 20 that I mentioned, or 20 some I mentioned on a previous slide, just to give you a flavor of some of the corrections that were done in the financial statements. But we did not include the entire list of those entries in this presentation. The adjusting entries that were not recorded in the financial statements are, this is a shorter list. These were not considered material, so they're not reflected in the financial statements. As you see, they're called uncorrected misstatements, but it's really just not reflected in the financial statements. Based on the materiality level that we set for the audit, we did not consider them material and agreed with management that they could be 5 annual
Could I interrupt to ask, could you, what was the materiality level?
Once again, we did not consider. Yes. What was the question? I'm sorry.
Could you speak, please, to the how you set the level of materiality?
Yes. So in the audit, as I mentioned, we issue a report stating that financial statements are materially correct. So every year for the audit, we establish a level of materiality that we consider to be appropriate from the auditor's standpoint, because we don't test 100% of the transactions that the district processes throughout the year. We have to make selections, and we use auditor judgment in doing so. And that auditor judgment includes qualitative information, so materiality of some of the transactions and balances in the financial statements, as well as quantitative information, such as making sure the debt covenants are met or there is no legal exposure to the entity and things like that matters. So we don't state what our materiality level is for every audit, but we do establish that level. So we use it as a benchmark for evaluating some of these journal entries that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Moving on. As far as we know, management did not consult with any other accountants. The reason that it is important to us as auditors is making sure that management doesn't shop for a second opinion, if you will, if we do have disagreements on any of the accounting practices or accounting policies or application of accounting standards. As I mentioned earlier, we did not really have any disagreements in the first place, so we are not aware of any consultation of management with other accountants other than obtaining assistance from another accountant on just making sure that all of the entries are recorded and just in preparing the financial statements in general. We do have to disclose the district is subject to potential legal claims, and if any of those could result in the significant liabilities to the district, they would be recorded in the financial statements. If we're not determining that there are significant liabilities that are identifiable or quantifiable, they should be disclosed in the footnotes to the financial statements, so that the matters that we consider to be commitments and contingencies are included in note 5. And for the district, they're very similar to what we see for other entities. There's no unusual matters disclosed in that footnote. So earlier I mentioned that we did issue a report on internal controls. We did have one matter that we consider material weakness in internal control over financial reporting. The auditor has 3 levels of a matter that they could report in this particular report: a control deficiency, a significant deficiency, or a material weakness. And so material weakness is kind of a highest level of the finding that we identified. The reason this year we're reporting a material weakness is because of the significant number of journal entries that we identified during the audit and a number of corrections that we had to post in order to finalize and correct the final annual audit report. So just the number of journal entries and some of the material adjusting entries that we posted kind of rose to that level of material weakness. New accounting standards, I just like to highlight these. These are on the screen for next year's reporting, or next couple of years, I should say, something that we will be working with management and assisting in implementation for the future year's reporting. Good news is in 2024, there was not a significant accounting standard implemented, unlike in the last few years that we've had a lot of new standards that have been issued by the GASB that needed to be implemented. So this was a quiet year, a few more coming up down the pike in the next couple of years. So I just like to highlight those for you. I'm not going to go in great detail in those. In general, I just wanted to thank Eric and everyone at the district for their help and assistance during the audit. As I said, we did not really have any disagreements or any difficulties and kind of worked through the audit as things were available for us to complete the audit. Everybody was very responsive and helpful in the process. So just wanted to thank everyone as part of that effort. And that concludes my presentation.
Great. Thank you, Olga, for your time in doing this and working with us on this. I want to turn it over maybe John and talk about finances review of this and opinions. If you could talk about what you discussed regarding the audit.
Yeah, so Finance Committee reviewed the audit and Olga, I think you could verify that you feel like the audited financials accurately represent the state of the business. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. So the document you have in front of you or on the screen right now is a final draft. And the reason we have it as a draft is so the board and the finance committee prior to that could review and make sure that they didn't have any changes, suggestions, or anything before we finalize the report. The finance committee did review this in our previous meeting in December. They had a few noted changes that we did reflect in this final report. So if this report is approved, we will issue and include an audit opinion in it dated today.
Yeah, and then your opinion was if we have better continuity of the accounting team here at the district, we'll probably avoid some of the journal corrections in future audits. Is that correct? You nodded yes, so I think.
Correct. So the material weakness was in part. Yeah, the material weakness was in part due to turnover in personnel at the district. So I think was having someone permanently in that position and getting up to speed in the next few months should help with limiting that in the next reporting period.
Okay, and then like last year, the finance committee is going to have a meeting with Olga and the Moss Adams team. I think next week we're scheduled.
Monday, yeah.
Yeah. So that's without
Correct.
management there, so we can have a candid conversation about the audit process and what improvements we might want to see. And that's about it. Thanks for all the hard work on this, Olga. It's a pleasure working with you and your team.
Do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
The only thing is this audit went smoother than the last one, so it's a positive direction, and I have every confidence that the team is going to do great for next year.
Bob, how long has Moss Adams been our auditing partner? Is it
6 years?
Several
I guess.
years.
Olga,
I think
how long?
This is
Several.
the 8th year. We've had 2 3-year contracts and then we're in the second year of a 3-year now, I think. Right, Olga?
Correct. Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Other board members have any other questions?
on the audit in total or to Moss Adams in particular?
For this agenda item?
Oh, I'd love to hear briefly, just because I knew why this year's went better, or we don't have to delve into last year's dirty laundry, but is there anything in particular that made this year's better than last year?
I think we're coming out of last year's audit. I think actually Eric could probably answer best, but I think there were better desk notes as far as how to prepare the materials for the audit and the timing of delivering those materials.
Desk notes?
There was no training for
Oh,
prepping for the audit by 2 predecessors ago. And so.
Oh, last
and
year
there
was no training. Is that what
no
you?
training
I
and there
see.
was no documentation of what to do. So staff was relying more on Moss Adams than they were comfortable with. So we hired a third-party accounting firm to answer those kind of questions. So Moss Adams retains their independence.
I
That
see.
was the concern coming out of last year. So Terry's predecessor did develop a detailed notebook of directions. And so then she will continue to build on that. So as Olga said, this will get smoother as we go, as long as Terry doesn't leave.
All right, I like that.
I mean, I guess what I would say, I mean, to that point though, I mean, I hope you have a very long and successful tenure here, but I do note that you did say that, you know, continuity and things that is important, but I would like us to get to a point where we can have turnover without thinking that we're going to fall back to issues and things like that. And I think you're doing that, but I just want to highlight that as an important point as we go into the next year, please.
Yeah, I think that's what you started putting in place with the transition from Tommy to.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So. And we are small. We have 17 employees. We're not
Yeah.
a multi-billion dollar,
Well, and
Right.
it's a
multi-thousand
very,
corporation with redundancy on redundancy. So there is that, but we're doing the best.
yeah, it's further complicated by the fact that we have almost two standards going on here, right? The one that the reporting that Russ requires, the one that Gab
Gap and give.
requires. So this is more complicated finances than your typical business. In addition.
I'm sorry to need a reminder. Russ Mello is because of the large electric related or the wastewater related loan.
Well, it's electric and it will soon be wastewater as
It
well.
applies-
And they probably,
Water doesn't have the same requirements as the that
But
side of
I'm-
the house doesn't make us do the same
but
thing.
if they'll have some requirements, none? Okay,
No, just we have to maintain the documents for 10 years.
oh, is that right?
For
That's
audit
it?
purposes, yeah. No, they're much easier on that other side of the
Wow.
US house.
Okay, so it's just electric.
Before we leave the agenda item, could I'd appreciate hearing from Finance Committee and from Eric, just a bit of conversation as to these corrected journal entries, the journal entry problem. Is there anything, the materiality of it, just your perspectives on it? And,
Well, I think what Olga said is they were corrections, not disagreements.
I see.
So like in the one case, there was a contractor that provides services in one period and that expense was recorded in another. There wasn't a disagreement over that.
Mm.
It was just the timing of that journal entry. It had to be re-journaled.
I
So
see.
given those sorts of adjustments, I think that's why Moss Adams and the Finance Committee be comfortable that these represent our financial state accurately.
Eric?
Yeah, I mean, just to give examples of exactly what John said, we get a bill in July, which covers partial July services, but as well as June services. So it has to be split and put in June and not all in July.
Right.
Or we get a shell invoice from 2022 in 2024. Because that's an adjusting entry from Cal ISO to Shell, who then passes it on to us.
Yeah, and there's actually, when you look at the accounts payable, that's one of the things I look at in the accounts payable is you look at all the back reporting, let's say by Shell. And it gives you an idea for what sort of transaction rates happening there and how much money is moving around based on those adjustments. And so that's tricky and tedious to have to record and re-record accurately.
That's what I should do with those AP ledgers. Thank you.
Oh yeah, looking at the dates of them is important, I think.
One just last question I'll pose. There was mention of with property tax reallocation that seemed to be, if I understood correctly, it seemed to be a pattern or something is it always a challenge maybe? Or was it a one-off?
It was a question of timing. We canceled the meeting we were going to adopt it in, so they didn't get the allocations approved by the board till very late in the audit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And that president's no longer president.
Yeah, get the.
So one thing I just maybe to Chris's earliest point when we walked in, I think it would be nice if we could have the slide deck presentation as a part of the board packet, as much as if we can time that out to be included so that the non-finance members can see that in addition to the report itself, as a note. And then other than that, we need to adopt this audit. So I would entertain a motion to adopt the audit.
Yeah, motion to adopt the audit.
Epstein, I second.
Okay, we'll do a voice vote. So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, it passes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Thanks, Dan.
Ross Adams.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time and your work.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
All right, we're gonna move on to agenda item 9B, which is on page 92 of the board packet. Eric?
Terry?
Okay, we're looking at the overview. And variances. So we did have a large expense for our paving that we did for the community service building and powerhouse. So you're going to see a large expense in our G&A, which is allocated across all the funds. Any questions on our overview?
Um,
And that was the only thing that had changed from the prior month was the large allocation to G&A for the paving. That was the biggest part of it. We also had some late billings from Aqua Sierra for the wastewater treatment plant. And again, those were spread, well, Aqua Sierra spread across two, and the bollards are spread across multiple.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yep.
Okay, let's continue to move on.
All right, moving down to the balance sheet.
Before we, there we go. Thank you.
Okay,
Is that where you want to be?
yep, balance sheet. Just our total operating is below budget and the total capital reserve is lower. It's due to the transfer and payoff of one of our rest loans in September. Anyone have questions? Okay,
Keep
let's
going.
move down to our November preliminaries.
Any questions on the individual funds
No.
before we get past that? Sometimes there are.
No.
I just like to ask.
Okay.
Get the hang of this.
I will.
Sound like
Keep moving. Page 109.
All right. So moving on to November preliminaries.
What page is it?
109.
109.
Okay. So November's operating revenues are better than budget. We've received our first installment of snow removal contract payments. Anyone have questions on this?
I might be jumping around if I'm up, let me know. Power purchase expenses, when you asked about individual funds, does that refer to the P&L of electric, for example? How are we doing on power purchase expense? It's in here somewhere.
Yeah, it's back in the one we just said we were done with, no questions.
Electric fund.
Electric funds, the cost of goods sold, that's where
Yeah.
you're gonna look at that,
That'd be
so
page
104.
104, sorry. Um,
under budget.
Okay, cost of goods sold. So year to date, we are 50,000 over. I asked, so we're 38% over on a pretty big cost item. Is that something to double click on or be concerned? I do note that when we set the budget at the start of the fiscal year, we had exceeded budget or plan on that COGS item last year. And yet the budget plan was as if we would go right back down to a roughly 750,000 a year level. And I just remember at the time wondering if we missed it last year, in other words, we were 20 or 25% over last year, how will we slip right back into conformity?
We were 500% over last year, fivefold, not 25%.
5x on electric
5x
COGS?
in January, was that, Bob?
No, I'm talking here for the full year.
Oh, no, not for the full year. No, but we did have that anomaly, but you also notice that so the COGS is higher because we sold more electricity, therefore the rates are higher. So the commercial and the residential usages are also higher and basically mirror the cost of goods sold when added together.
So COGS isn't gonna be fixed for the year. It's based on how much we buy.
Well, of course, but we were 20% over last year in COGS. I don't think, or power purchase expense. I don't know if that
We
is.
were under in revenue. That was the difference. Now our revenue is over and our COGS is over. They're tracking together. So we're
Okay.
selling more power and we're purchasing more power.
Really, my question is just whether we should be talking about this at all, and perhaps the answer is no. But as I understood last year's final 12-month numbers, power purchase was at 880 versus 725, so that was a 20% overage in COGS, but revenue and certainly kilowatt hours was not 20% over plan last year.
That's
That's
why
what
we
we're saying.
Then we did the hedge.
This is what the
We did
hedge
the
was,
hedge.
right?
Right,
Because we were losing money
yeah.
by selling a kilowatt hour.
That was my very first meeting. I barely got it, but okay, yeah, all right. So, in other words, the fact that we're 37% over year to date is nothing to be concerned about. We are,
As long as.
Over on the
is
revenue
tracking
side.
The same, correct.
And since we're
Same for
hedging,
propane. It's
so-
exact same principle. for
Okay.
propane.
and since we're hedging, we should be tracking accordingly. And I guess if your question is more of how do we budget, generally speaking, that's a different question, I would say.
Well, we budget kilowatt hours,
Right.
and then we hope we do better than budget.
Right,
Right, and we're only hedging 85%.
Yeah.
that's
So-
true.
6.3.
Yeah, the average of the
So, I mean,
last
if you
5
just,
years.
if you want to look at year to date, so in terms of sales, we're 46,000 to the good, and in terms of COGS, we're 50,000 to the bad. They're basically tracking together.
I see the
So if
50.
there was a big disparity there, a big delta, then that's when you would be concerned. Same for propane.
When you say 40,000, you're just talking commercial, residential, but not the other two lesser items. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
That's fine.
You wouldn't
Okay, got
count
it.
that.
Thank you.
Would internal usage, would I count that or not? I probably should, so I guess.
That's okay.
I guess if I counted internal usage, we're 57 to the good and 51 to the bad, so we're actually better.
Good.
Because internal usage, we do charge ourselves, so.
Thank you.
Back to page 109.
Or are we going to, thought we were on to
Oh,
cash flow?
Anyone
Yeah,
else,
cash
will anyone have a 109 or do you want to go to 110 cash flow? Fine with that. Go to 110 cash flow.
Okay. There we go. So looking at November,
We're tracking well.
any questions?
But bear in mind, the reason we're 217,000 short or underperforming is the three things that Terry identified at the beginning. The bollard materials that were unanticipated, the Aqua Sierra late invoice, and mostly paving.
The bollards that was a new requirement that we had to do for
Our
security.
facilities were being damaged repetitively, and so we had to install bollards to protect them. And in most cases, in one case, Aqua JPA, our insurance company, requested that we install bollards at the propane tank, so we did as part of our
Okay.
annual safety audit. So it was two things, but it was one, protecting our facilities that were repetitively damaged, and one, protecting our facilities as per the requirements of our insurance company.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Any questions on cash flow? Okay. That's it. All right, we will move on to agenda item 9C. Unfortunately, there was not
Yes.
a report that was
Yeah.
intended to be in the packet.
It
So it's
The
here
minute
for us
from
to
the
use.
packet, apologies, but in short, I'll just read through this. So Peter, Chris, and myself met to discuss, the chairs of the two respective committees met to discuss the possible merger. And so after a good discussion, we had the following recommendations. That the Operations and Planning Committee merge into the Engineering Operations and Planning Committee. The attached charter be adopted, which was basically a blending of the two charters and broadened, so it was a little more overly broad, so more planning topics could fall into it. That the current community members be invited to continue on the new committee. We have 5 open spots, and there's only 4 active committee members, and that because there's a veil member on each of the 2 committees, that we contact them to see which one would like to be on the committee, both of which have minimally participated over the last few years.
Okay.
Is that a good summary, Chris,
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
I know one thing I had mentioned was maybe expanding the number of community members. Can you address is that something that you want to do or not do? Not do?
Seems like 5 is enough.
Times it up, okay?
Yeah, and you know, participation on ops, we have 1 person that participates. Participation on planning, we have ostensibly really 2 that participate. So
Both of those two have told me in the last few days they'd be happy to continue if we want.
Great.
That's Eric Rickard and Preston
Preston.
Roper.
Great, thank you. Can we see the
yes,
charter too? Because I think
Yes.
we will want to have 2 things motioned today. One would be to merge these two committees and obviously dissolve the existing ones that and operations and planning independently, and also to adopt the charter for this as well.
And I'll read the charter just
As I was saying, if
Great
we can get
benefit.
some highlights of this.
Yeah, I'll just read the
benefit.
purpose. The purpose probably covers everything. The detail is just, the purpose is a summary of the details. So I'll just go through the purpose. The EOP committee is established as a standing committee of the board of directors whose primary duties are to recommend engineering, planning, and execution of facilities, capital projects, and acquisition, development, and disposition of real property. Further, the committee shall review operational standards, services, and related policies and practices. The committee reviews proposals, contracts, bids, and short or long-term strategic plans. The committee provides a general forum for providing advice, recommendation, and opinions on matters related to engineering, operations, and planning to help the board and management arrive at informed decisions. The committee shall review and recommend engineering, operations, and planning policies and practices consistent with the current best practices for districts of similar size and complexity.
I had a question because one of the items that precipitated this was kind of a lack of tasks for the planning committee, right? I mean, that's what brought this on. And then we just reviewed the master plan for electricity, and that was done in operations. And it seemed that, we've got a number of master plans in work. Why wouldn't that be done in planning instead of ops, I guess?
Because master plans are operational documents.
Yeah, I'd say wherever they reside, I kind of a similar request to what you asked about the audit presentation is I'd like to see the master plans. There's two items I'd like to see earlier than a board package, which is the meaty items like the master plans and and when we go into rate studies. Like to get those just for board approval. If you're not in the committee, it's too much content to go through in a couple days. So I'd like to see early drafts of those, if that's agreeable.
When you say you mean finance committee or any board member?
I think all board members ought
Yeah.
to see them.
I can speak to Eric about that and try to, because I think, yeah, the audit stuff, master plans, rate studies, we can make sure, I can talk to Eric about the logistics of that, how we can sort that out. With regards to this topic, any other questions around the merger or in the charter as stated? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to both merge operations and planning to a new committee named what we call it, engineering operations and planning, dissolve the two independent committees as they exist today, and to adopt the charter. Is there a motion to do those things?
Yeah, I'll move to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes, thank you. All right, next agenda item is 9D. So I will start by saying thank you for everyone's service on committees as they have existed. By merging two committees in together, it changes the number of positions that we have to sit on two different committees. I tried to take a pass at thinking about where and how we could best do these things. In my opinion, we have three committees that are doing substantive, continually monthly work, which would be finance, engineering, operations, planning, and communications. And so I tried to allocate amongst those 6 seats, the 5 of us, and Chris, you got allocated 2, one of which being finance, because as you saw, as evidence today, you have a lot of good questions about finance. And I think it would be a good place for you to get into earlier on some of these topics. That's why I moved you into that committee, just because I thought as a newer board member, it would be a great place for you to spend some time getting into those topics. And then after that, personnel and IT and cybersecurity are important. They don't meet quite as frequently. And so I just tried to allocate across those a little bit of what's happened already. And then LAFCO at the end there is something that hasn't met in years at this point,
Yeah,
at some point. And so
it's a mystery.
it's a mystery. And so that was my intent here. I obviously tried to put some balancing of the numbers at the bottom here. Peter, I gave you one assignment. If you'd like to be on another one, we can discuss that. But not obviously in any disrespect or anything like that, but I thought you might not want to be on IT and cybersecurity as much as continue with engineering planning. So given your expertise.
That's not my expertise.
So anyway, this was again my first pass at doing this, and just wanted to again thank everyone for the time on what they've done, and then obviously wanted this to be in the board packet so everyone have a chance to think about this and have thoughts and opinions about it as we came to this meeting. So with that said, does anyone have any comments or questions or concerns?
Yeah, how many times have we been fished in the last month?
For IT and cybersecurity? That's in our report, actually.
It's coming up later.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
Are those outer fish or inner fish?
Space fish.
Space fish.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so does anyone have any thoughts about these assignments? If everyone's amenable to them, we can vote on them and accept the motion, but otherwise, welcome any other comments that people have.
So, Doug, you're not oversubscribed? You're comfortable with that?
I think I'm feeling pretty good about it right now. If someone wanted to do IT and cybersecurity, I'd welcome someone to do IT and cybersecurity. Someone wanted to step into that. I'm happy continuing to do it. Doesn't meet that often.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing for us to talk about. So for me, it was a surprise, a pleasant surprise. Finance, I agree with your thinking and welcome the chance to learn from that. Working with John, but also a number of people, outsiders on the committee who have a lot of built up knowledge about PUD. So I like that. I've liked the work we're doing on communications and think there's, we've done some good stuff and there's more to do. And I like staying on with that. I was a proponent of what we did with planning. I thought Eric's idea on planning was a good one to merge the two. I'm sorry, I'd be sorry to step off it. So that's a bummer. But I, two. I also think it's probably a good thing that, Bob, for example, will move into other things because, it spreads Bob's years of experience and enterprise knowledge around. So I don't really know what to say about my own personal views on planning other than would have been nice. And I'll leave it there.
Oh, thank you. And that was part of the thinking with Peter and Bob pairing as well. It was just leveraging longevity and knowledge on long-term plans is, I think, useful. Okay. If there are no other comments or suggestions, I would entertain a motion to accept the proposed assignments.
Bob, you like the new proposal?
I like or just, this is a little bit of an impossible job to do. So I somebody needs to just make some decisions. So yeah, I'm fine with doing this. I don't have any problems.
That was a strong endorsement.
What did John say?
That's a strong endorsement.
A strong endorsement.
No, it is. It's really difficult. Yeah, I think.
I mean, in the future, if we find we have a need to emphasize planning more, if all of a sudden there's lots of development, I mean, we can always alter the committee structure. I mean, it's kind of a movable feast, really.
Like the Hemingway reference, Peter. One of my favorite books.
Yeah, it's got good ski stuff in there.
Oh, yeah, he liked to do that.
So I move we adopt the committee's assignments as proposed.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
All right. All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate thoughtfulness that everyone put into this. Let's move on to agenda item 9E, performance reporting and aquifer levels. Andy, if you're there.
Virtual Brandy.
I am. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello? Oh, okay, great. All right. So for this month's performance reporting, looking at electric, we see that Our actual metered for the month was just over 900,000 kilowatt hours. Of that, we saw approximately 7% unidentified losses, bringing us to 12% for the year. And that was a substantial bump over what we had budgeted for kilowatt hours. We were expecting somewhere in the 700,000 range. I expect that that can be attributed to snowmaking and also the couple of days that the resort opened early in November.
Interesting. Where do you
Looking
expect it to
over
be in,
to-
I'm sorry, Brandon, just in general, December, January, roughly we do about 1 million in a busy ski month. Is that accurate? In other words, how this bumped up to 1
It
million?
varies. Yes, it did. With the entire resort open, we should see a good solid December also. And then we did have snowmaking throughout much of December also. So I expect to see a strong December also.
Just to get a ballpark, and I know I could go back to last year's numbers, but I mean, is snowmaking so heavy that it lifts November high, to a large number, and December is unlikely to be 1 million, or is a busy winter month typically 1.x million?
Certainly winter months with significant snowmaking are in the approximate million range. The rest of once snowmaking shuts down for the year, or if they have a slower year because of temperatures or whatnot, we can see fluctuations there.
The trends are on page 170.
That's right. There are those graphs. You're right. I forgot about that. Thank you, Brandy. If you can hear me.
I can. So if we're ready to move on to propane, we saw a strong month in propane also. Our actual metered was 2.2 million cubic feet. We had about a 4% unidentified loss there. But again, we were trending above what we had budgeted for the month. Year to date, propane, we're sitting at 4% loss. And moving on into water, for the month of November, our metered gallons were 1.1 million gallons, 12% loss for the month, 18% loss year to date, which did include some higher than expected internal usage for our projects of the wastewater treatment plant and the wintergreen sewer that we mentioned last time. And this also, the November water use number, it is impacted by snowmaking, since the snowmaking at Timber Creek does come from our water system. And then lastly, for the month of November, at the wastewater treatment plant, we saw 530,000 gallons of inflow. Of that, 16% was unidentified, which means it came from sources other than sinks, drains, toilets. We did see some wet weather in November, which bumped that up a little higher than we saw in October. And as you guys mentioned, we do have all of our trending charts included in the packet. Also the aquifer level sheets for well 4 and 5. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Brandy?
Not for me.
Anyone else? I cannot see hands up or anything either, right?
I do not.
I was going to say these charts answer the question, my silly question from earlier about monthly max, except November does not appear to be over 1 million. In other words,
It's not.
but didn't we just say that it is?
These charts represent sold kilowatts,
12,000.
not purchased.
Not metered and purchased?
Yeah, and the difference is the losses.
Okay, right.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, so hearing none. Thank you, Brandy. Move on to agenda item 9.
Thank you.
Page 121. So this is the KVFD operational models. Chief Ansel will discuss where we are. As a reminder, we've had a consultant talking about how we would pay for these things, and also we've been looking into how we would fund, how we would structure and the costs associated with the different models that we could entertain. Chief.
Thank you. So as the president just mentioned, we're working with the consultant Francisco and Associates to develop the benefit assessment engineering report, which is not quite completed. We're going to be meeting with them next week and hope to have something to bring back to the board in February. In the meantime, I was asked to work up some labor estimates for if the board decides to go with an internal fire department. And on page 121 is actually the labor costs, which I feel would be competitive and my best estimate on what it would take for us to have a paid fire department internally. This does include the CalPERS 14% safety retirement package, which we previously talked about in the past. So again, I'm looking at like almost $1.8 million for labors. Putting that with our current budgets, so expenses and accessories. On page 122, you can see on the green line kind of what it would look like if we decided to go internally for a paid fire department. This was also something that the general manager and I discussed, and we thought it was important to give Francisco Associates the numbers for also the Amador Fire Protection Agency's contract labor estimate, which is on page 123. And then finally on page 124, we're looking at about $1.5 million expense for basically hiring Amador Fire Protection Agency to contract for labor. As of yet, we still have not received any estimates from Alpine County for labor services. And so that essentially is my report, unless there's any questions from the board.
Yeah, and the OpEx is 77,000. That includes housing costs, vehicle maintenance, fuel, things like that. That's kind of all in.
Yes.
Okay. And depreciation is of the apparatus.
Yes, we take depreciation on vehicles, some equipment.
Okay.
Rick, could you clarify something for me about Amador Fire? Is it called AFPD, Fire Protection?
That's correct.
I just don't know how this works in Jackson, but Jackson's the county seat of Amador. Chief Withrow is based in Jackson. Isn't that true? And yet my understanding is that AFPD is not the fire department for Jackson proper, maybe. There's Ione, there's Sutter Creek, maybe. So what is the geography that AFPD covers?
Yeah, Eric, you want to?
Yeah, basically, I'll tell you what it doesn't cover. That's easier. So City of Jackson has its own fire department. City of Sutter Creek has its own fire department. City of Ione has its own fire department. Plymouth and Amador City, the only other two incorporated cities in Amador County, contract with AFPD, just like we're proposing or potentially going to do. The Buena Vista Fire Department, that is all volunteer fire department, that is on the verge of folding. And Lockwood.
Buena Vista is somewhere.
Buena Vista, it's the western edge near San Joaquin County. Near the Buena Vista Saloon, which I highly recommend you go to. Don't ask me how I know that. I judged a chili contest there one time. So, and then there was Lockwood volunteer. They have since folded into AFPD because it's no longer viable being a volunteer fire department in California anymore.
So AFPD covers much of Amador County, but not some of the main
Everything
towns you
except for
might
what
know.
I just said.
What's that?
Everything except for the ones I just said.
But but the net of that statement is that AFPD is not what I kind of thought it was, which is It's based in Jackson. It covers Jackson and
The county seat is in Jackson. So the county offices, the county supervisors, which represent the whole of the county, are all based in Jackson. That's just where the offices are.
Is it
Just
really?
like this is the office and you don't live here, this is the Kirkwood office. So
Right.
We're just based here.
I can grasp an abstract contract concept like that, but I guess what's only relevant to us is just how big is this fire district? It's obviously not as big as I thought, because I thought it included the county seat. But is it big and well funded? How big of an addition would we be to their overall?
We would not, I mean,
We would be
same
just
as
like
Plymouth.
Plymouth, Lockwood, we would just be another, essentially a station to them.
So it'd be one more station in a list of maybe 10 or something, but not 100. And
Not that many, but
They
yeah.
have 8
yeah, okay,
stations.
so that's ballpark. And
They also have a station at the Rancheria.
Yeah.
So they do cover the Rancheria as well.
okay,
You know, Jackson has a population of 5,000 people.
4,800 and some of it.
Well, it says 5,132 here,
Not
but
anymore.
not anymore. Did your relatives move out?
I drive by the side every day.
So anyway, I mean, this is a rural county structure. There's people everywhere, Pioneer, you know, and probably
Yeah.
the sum of Pioneer and Plymouth, you take some of the others. So they know how to handle
Yeah.
large territories. You know, and they already manage a number of fire stations and have 30 some firefighters. So growing it by 10% is
Yeah.
it, you know, it sounds like it's about 10%, we'd be about 10% growth. Something
I
like that.
think Chief Withrow said 6 months to staff up, or 3 months, 3 to 6
Yeah.
months to staff up.
So we certainly are, with the exception of the elevation, we are typical of what they currently do.
but well-resourced, good tax base, good relations with the county supervisors. Those are all things that,
Well, they have their own board, even though some of the board members are on the they are county supervisors. So they are definitely a decent standalone
Okay.
organization.
thank you for
And
clarifying.
they just passed their 218 tax in the past year.
Mhm.
Yeah, so they're up to date in terms of cost and revenue.
I don't have all the other G&A allocation numbers for the other services. I wasn't able to track that down quickly. So how did you arrive at 164.7, and then
That's from the budget that was adopted by the board.
Yes.
and how's it compared?
That's
to
the percent allocations that we changed back when KMA came back, if you remember.
Okay,
So we had one set, and then when KMA came back, we
you
rejiggered
don't feel
the
like
G&A.
this has an impact on G&A allocations? as
No,
far
the
as
G&A
more-
allocations are to stay because it's basically their portion, you know, the electricity, the propane, everything we provide for the fire bay and the fire quarters, they consume, you know, but it's all paid off of the CSB meters. There is no separate meter
Okay.
for that. So,
So by either outsourcing the audit or having a paid fire department, you don't see a difference.
because they're going to be using the same quarters, yeah.
Okay.
And still, and assuming they use all our equipment, we're still gonna have the same operating expenses to recert, you know, the pumps and all those things that it does every year, the scuba, the fire backflow preventers and all those things, so.
Thank you for putting this together. I mean, to
Yeah.
me, it concludes that for Amador to scale is a substantially lower risk than for us to try to build from scratch. And it would probably cost more to build from scratch with a higher risk. And that's what I take away from these charts. Would you disagree with that, or?
No, I think you summarized it nicely. And, you know, really, what we have is a risk management problem for the fire department. And putting my risk manager hat for the district on, there's 3 things you think about as a risk manager. You think about risk avoidance, risk reduction, and then, of course, risk transfer. Going with an amateur model, we're transferring the risk to a different agency. Of course, we're paying for that risk, but it takes off the responsibility of training, the training requirements that firefighters have now for even a volunteer. You have to meet to the California standards, not just hey, do 180 hours and you're a volunteer firefighter, good to go. You have to meet the actual state requirements for firefighter 1. Of course, the EMT training requirements, follow SOP, emergency vehicle operations, other things that we currently do not do. We do the best we can with what we have. But again, I'm the only firefighter one on the department. I'm one of now 2 EMTs. We've got 2 more that are on the process of passing the course, but we just don't have the training experience and the volunteers to support the job that we're doing, all the risk hazards that we have to provide, and the decision making that we have on the ground. My fear is that if we don't reduce the risk for the fire department, for personnel, we want them to go home safely after they do the job. But we also don't want to put more liability on the district where, yeah, we acted, but we didn't act in the right way. We burned a building down. Someone got hurt, someone got killed. Where's that liability lie? And so this labor estimate is my best guess of what it would take for us to pay for a fire department internally, reduce that risk. And I'm giving you this after 30 years of being in the fire service or in law enforcement and seeing how things work and talking to other volunteer fire departments that are just barely limping along, as well as seeing departments change to a paid department. If we really want to do this right, this is what the cost is going to be. There are different options. The board could decide to reduce the numbers and say, hey, we want to hire 1 or 2 people. You can do that, but it's not going to change the problem that we have today. We just don't have the personnel to provide the services that we should provide. So,
Okay, the delta in cost between doing our own and Amador is kind of intuitive. I mean, that's what I don't have your expertise, but it's what I expected to see.
But can you go into a little bit more depth on the options? Because I feel like one of the questions I get asked a lot is, we're operating in our certain way today, where we have a volunteer fire chief and we have a bunch of volunteer firefighters. You've outlined different personnel. Why can't we just hire a fire chief and just have it be one, one very small fraction of that overall number that you've given here? And so I'm wondering if you can talk about more about what are the issues that you would see with operating. Is there anything that's changed around us that impacts this? What else is going on that we should be thinking about in terms of the risks or any other impacts about operating like we are today?
Hiring the chief is great, but again, we try to provide service 24/7. And if you replace me with somebody else, we're still gonna have the same problem. We don't have a full complement of volunteers to do the job. And that's volunteers that are skilled, they're trained. They can make the right decision at the right time. I was talking with Eric, and we were looking at what was it, 1987?
1997
97.
Fire Services Master Plan,
Yeah,
who said we would be staffed up in 3 years to 48 qualified volunteers.
Yeah.
48?
48, that's the
48.
level they said we needed in 1997.
yeah. Go paid, but continue that 48 list of volunteers. We just don't have it. So if you can keep doing onesies and twosies, but you're just not going to get the service. People are going to get, why should they stay when, there's 1 or 2 people being paid and then the rest of them are volunteers. You're setting yourself up for failure. If you want to do this, you're going to need to pay for it, unfortunately. And that's the decision the community's going to have to ultimately make.
Well, and what you're saying now is and what you said all along is very consistent from what we heard from the Amador chief when he spoke at the last board meeting.
Yes.
Right.
One of the things that impressed me at the last board meeting from Chief Withrow, he said 2 things he looked at. What's the timeliness of response? And the other is how much force is the response? He used the different terms, but saying, if you want to be able to deal with it, having 3 people is the minimum to be able to actually respond with sufficient force to deal with the issue. And then that's complemented by volunteers as they're available. And so I just don't see, unless it's an established organization that's growing a little, I just don't see how to do that. And if we work on a scenario, well, at least there'll be somebody there. That somebody's at great risk trying to deal with something by themselves. And I just, if Caldor were 2 weeks ago, we'd feel a much greater sense of urgency as a community. I mean, a starting, brush fire like starting in the summer, waiting an hour for somebody to show up. It's, we could lose a lot of the community. And so I think the risk of not having emergency response is gonna be serious, both in terms of people and in terms of structures. I don't know what date it'll happen, but as a board member, I want to do everything I can, try to make sure that we do have proper resources. It's very expensive, and I don't know if the community will go for it.
I just laughed because you said, I thought you were gonna say, as a board member, I want to be sure I'm off the board on that date.
No,
Yeah. So our next step, Doug, is a Zoom meeting in February.
Well, I might want
Am I
to stay on this for a
jumping ahead?
second.
we should see if there's other questions.
Yeah, I want to make
Sorry.
sure there's other questions here. I guess,
Excuse me.
If there's any from the audience.
yeah, anything from the audience, start with that. I guess one other thing I just want to touch on too here is, other things that I get asked about frequently are the level of services that we provide today versus here, and then also, again, reiterating medical or ambulance types of services that I do not believe are included in these numbers. But if you can just speak to those and maybe making sure everyone's on the same page as to level of service, medical and fire, and what that means.
So my expectation for a level of service with the model that I presented is that these are firefighter EMTs.
Mhm.
Basic with the hope that we can convince Mountain County's EMS, our medical authority, to give us more authorization to do higher level skills, like to innovate, to do more paramedic level skills. So it's an EMT basically too, but with the idea that we have at least 2 EMTs on that can support each other to do CPR, to do whatever we need to do to administer some drugs, not all pharmaceuticals, but some of the lower stuff that would be beneficial for the community. In years past, when we had the 2 EMTs, of course, we had an ambulance, which reduced that golden hour. We were able to transfer the patient to the county line or to a higher level of care quicker. And that really is a stepping stone to becoming, hey, let's hire paramedics if we have funding and do that. We have no option to do that now because we have 1 EMT or 2, that's it. The other side of this is, I'm thinking about personnel, is that, putting one person on the scene is very difficult for one person to be the incident commander, to be in charge of what's going on and also do patient care and also put the fire out. And so we have to have whatever plan, whatever contract has to have a minimum level of people to be proficient and actually get things going until help gets there. And so kind of circling back to your idea, why can't we just level this out? We've talked about this in the past, presenting different models. And again, you can do that, but it's not ideal. And it's going to put more hazards on that employee. Remember, these are employees, even though we call them volunteers. We have to cover their work comp. We want to make sure they're safe. I would hate to see someone get injured because they felt like they needed to go into a burning building and weren't able to be pulled out because we don't have enough to do the 2 in and 2 out rules that we've discussed before. And I may have missed part of that. Was there another section of that question or?
I think, just the being very clear that the level of service here is not an ambulance.
Yeah.
And I guess I'd also relate this back to Kirkwood Mountain Resort and their facilities in terms of that's still not a receiving facility for this. So my understanding, right? So this would be a situation where it wouldn't be very different from today's model, where if a call came in, if you're on the mountain, ski patrol takes you to the clinic, that's one thing. But if you're calling 911 and these firefighters showed up, whichever model we were in, that would still be a situation where you're working through our own ambulance calls coming in or flights out. That's not through the clinic. We would not take them to the clinic.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts, questions on this?
I'm happy to see all in numbers, and it'll be interesting to see the allocations that come out if we get that completed for the next board meeting.
I guess I would just say, just going back to this, I want to make sure because I feel like every time I talk to someone about this, it always comes back to why can't we just keep doing what we're doing? And I want to make sure that we're all very clear on what you're saying. It's partly the level of service, but you're also saying that there's a risk involved with that in terms of hazard to the people that are there. And I imagine also to the people that are trying to save as well.
Correct.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions?
I feel like the current structure we're on is hoping that the time there's an emergency, we happen to have the right people.
Okay.
That's our current model. And that it's just not,
Hope is not a strategy.
hope is not a strategy, exactly.
Okay. One of the things, whether we could do it, I guess, one of the things that we're talking about for the kind of melding into the next agenda item in some ways is where we go next with this. So kind of to your question, Chris, one of the things that communications wrote in the packet, if you saw the report there, was a suggestion that we would go forward with a mock ballot, because my understanding is that to do the actual 218 process is going to cost us large amounts of money.
Correct.
And so as a proxy to that, to initially get the temperature of the community, we would want to go forward with what we find out in February, to have a much less expensive version of that, where we might be able to go forward with a ballot to the community to say, you know, we could outline options A, B, and C, being A being do it ourselves, B being outsourced to Amador, or C, we dissolve, and see what people's votes would look like. And then we might be able to use that information to inform whether we go forward to the formal 218 process down the road.
When you say ballot, do you mean survey?
It would be it would be an email survey
Yeah.
type of thing,
We
where
call it a mock ballot. So,
mock ballot.
and then what do we do? I mean, the other part is, what do we do to have education and communication
Correct.
prior to that?
And that's so we've scheduled for a meeting on January 23rd at 6 p.m. for the community to see this. And so communications committee will be working with Chief Ansel on putting together a similar forum as we did about a year and a couple of days ago, I guess it would have been, with the community that we did in person, but we're gonna do this one on Zoom since now we have more information. As you might recall, we discussed doing this over the December week there, but we didn't have this information available, so we decided to hold off. So here we are, we'll do this, and then likely another session in February when we have the consultant allocations, and again, trying to get the community to do this. And then, I mean, I don't have a perfect roadmap of what this could look like, but it would be doing as many of these things and reaching out. I will say that I have reached out to every HOA president, our property management services, myself as a new president, and part of what I have to do is help inform them about this important conversation. And so those are things that I'm personally doing, and I think as a communications and a board, in the district, we will be doing as well. And we mentioned this in the newsletter. We'll continue to mention this in the newsletter. I don't know. If you have any other suggestions of what we should do, please mention.
I'll probably send out a community notice too.
You notice, I mean, we could entertain a Facebook post, perhaps, like I think we did that for last year as well, mentioning this there as well, some of the Facebook outlets.
I'm very hesitant about doing a survey because it assumes everybody who receives it is either already informed or is going to inform themselves before they fill it out. And I think our biggest weakness is making sure people understand what we currently have and why we need what we need. So I'm not sure that would work. A labor-intensive way of doing this would be to organize focus groups and trying to get a collection of people, and have a focus group presented. Let them ask questions, let them inform themselves. Because I think if it just goes out for a vote, I think people say it's expensive and we're fine the way we are. And I just don't know whether the education is actually going to reach.
Yeah, the status quo is kind of what has been unclear, I think. If you didn't if you voted no on Measure E and you're not close to this issue, you think you had you think you had a fully staffed service this last year. The majority of people, I think, would just assume, oh, I had a fire department that was going to respond.
That's
So-
probably true. I mean, I don't know, but it sounds reasonable. But it does suggest that all these people failed to read the urgent missive that we sent out 6 or 8 weeks ago, that really did lay out in unvarnished, no holds barred, dissolving the KBFD is on the table. I do know some people, of course, who did get that message, between the eyes. Could you imagine, John, if we took an approach that in one message, I guess Bob voiced the concern, in one mailing, a one-page summary again that says, we mailed you back in October to paint the picture. We come to you now with a survey question. Read this one-page description of the status quo before you fill out the survey. Take your time. The deadline's, 3 weeks to mull this over. Don't fill out the survey in haste, but
Okay,
can you imagine something like that that would work around your concern?
I can't. I
Oh.
can't imagine a situation where that will work.
Yeah, I think.
And I have a pretty good imagination. This is this is first off a problem of figuring out what would actually work and what do we need. I feel like we'll have that information once they figure out the allocation. Then it's a political problem. And you don't solve political problems by saying, you should read this and then tell me what you think. It just doesn't work that way. It works with a ground, people on the ground and meetings. So I think at a minimum, when we have the information after 23rd, put together 2 or 3 focus groups
And say, well,
and see what we learn. And if the solution to this problem is, because we need several hundred votes. That's not a huge number. If it took 4 months to do enough focus groups to get everybody on board, we'd be a lot better off than just assuming people are going to read it and reach.
when you say focus group, we say Zoom meeting for the whole community, same thing, I guess.
No,
but-
it's not the same.
Oh, really?
At all.
Okay, please. I mean, the focus group would be to take a group of 6 or 10 people or something.
And getting their feedback. Getting their questions, answering if you have it. It's getting their feedback and then asking them, how would you move? The large community meetings, you don't know what people think or feel at the end of the meeting. You just know you did your best job of informing them.
Okay.
Well, I guess one thing I would say is, just as a practical matter for maybe Eric and Rick, what feedback? Well, feedback is that the allocation process doesn't seem fair. I mean, we've heard that before. Is that feedback that we could act on? Would we change anything? I mean, could we change anything? Would that be something that would be, we hired a consultant to give us a recommendation? So we got feedback in some certain way. Would we be able to act on it?
Well, not much.
No, we could, so before I answer that, let me just address a couple things. Chris made a good point about the urgent missive. I like that terminology. After we sent out this urgent missive, you know how many total views we had in the entire quarter of the future of KBFD? 169, and that includes employees when we had to go update stuff. 169 people cared out of however many we sent it to. And then relative
500
to
or 600, right?
yeah. So,
Yeah.
and then relative to Measure E, that was voters, not property owners. It's a completely different demographic.
Yep.
It's absentee landlords. It's people that haven't visited their place in 10 years. And then it's a handful of people that live here full time, which there's 5 or 6, not including employees. So it just wanted to point that out because
Your
those are
point
big
is-
differences.
Even the urgent missive didn't get enough people
No
to,
one cared.
yeah.
No one cared.
Mm.
And that's only last quarter. I'm just like, that's the only data I pulled. We're getting that ready for
Is it
communication.
your belief no one cares because they don't care or because they just don't pay attention to anything and they miss the message?
I don't know.
We don't know, right?
I don't know. So anyway, sorry, back to your question, Doug. What was it again?
So I
Did we do anything with the result?
I'm just saying, I don't disagree with Bob's feedback. But I don't like asking for feedback and not being able to take
Okay,
action on it.
sorry.
So if we ask, oh, what do you think about this plan? And they're like,
Right.
well, I don't like this allocation.
Allocations are done by a professional registered engineer who developed a nexus, and in his professional judgment, which is a standard set by the state, he believes this is the most appropriate way to allocate things. Lay people aren't going to armchair quarterback this.
Well, I would say, no matter what allocation structure you get out there, you're gonna get some complaints.
Of course.
And I would guess that there'll be some appeal process as part of that too. I mean, at least that's what happened with Amador County's 218 process. There was an appeal process if somebody felt like the allocation, they were misallocated, whatever.
Miscategorized.
Yeah, that they could do an appeal process. So I think that's kind of with my education of watching 1-2-18 process. That's what happened there is all sorts of there were all sorts of complaints about the allocations, and that's going to happen no matter what you do. And I think the way to deal with that is you do have some sort of appeal process to say it was misclassified.
Eric, is it your memory of Measure E that did that activate people? I mean, my sense was that it did, that they sort of like, oh shit, we gotta, do people pay attention when a vote gets put on a ballot? I got your point that it's a different constituency, that's a gap, but what is it gonna take to get people to realize what they're voting for?
Kind of late at that point, though.
It's what?
If they have a ballot in their hand, it's a little late.
Too late,
Yeah,
right,
And
exactly.
it's sort of education, communication.
With Measure E, we communicated through many board meetings and discussions, and it got to the point where the community said, why didn't you tell me when I wasn't paying attention when Measure E hit? And so I think ultimately my recommendation to the board is let's get the engineer's report back. Let's look at that and then make decisions moving forward on how you want to communicate that out. And continue with the annual recap of the state of the nation with the fire department on the January 30th. So the ones that do care, will at least maybe can tell some of their neighbors what's going on. But I feel like the board needs to have all the facts before they can move forward with next steps and decisions.
And you need personal communication and feedback. I agree with.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't mutually exclusive things. I mean,
Yeah,
this is,
right.
I asked what other things should we do?
Right.
And Bob is giving us another thing that we should do. So that's fine. I mean, that's just another thing that we could do. In addition to large community meetings, and we can do more.
Yeah, I would want to have confidence that the community is likely to support this before putting it out. And the only way to get that is with conversations. And a survey doesn't provide me any confidence. As 24% of the people will reply anonymously. That doesn't tell you whether you have the votes.
When we say have the votes, is it the votes to go forward with the 218 process and see where things fall? Or is it the vote to actually, make the final decision?
The final decision.
Yeah.
Was someone willing to assess themselves this dollar amount for their own safety?
And is it fair to say we're trying to decide whether to go forward with the 218 and this process of survey and meetings and sample or survey ballot? That's, I think you said it, Doug, that's a way to maybe get some sense of the public or the community
Correct.
mood without going forward with the 218.
There's two aspects. Are we going to send something out that people don't understand and aren't going to know how to vote for and not vote for successfully because of not understanding something? And then there's that costs a lot of money to do that in the first place, and the consequences are going to be dire in the sense that they might not understand. And so what we're saying is, what are the information actions that we can take, which includes a community forum or focus groups, but also the likelihood by which it's worth spending the money to do. Because if it's going to fail,
218.
if we know that no one's going to vote for this, then let's not spend $100,000
On a
to
218.
218.
Okay.
And so the idea would be twofold of education and having, as Bob said, confidence that this would pass to make it worth the time.
Or
to
enough
go forward.
confidence
Enough-
at
enough
50-50,
yeah,
so at least we gotta spend the money and find out.
So this is good to identify issues and ideation and all that, but I would suggest that we put together kind of the project plan for what are we gonna do? What are the steps we're gonna take with either community-wide meetings, with focus group meetings, with a mock ballot? You'll lay that out and who can we assign that to lay out that plan that we could review as a board and then execute on it? Right? Because I think we all want the same thing. I think we all see the danger of not having emergency services, fire protection in this valley, right? But we also saw the results of Measure E. And so we know we've got a big communication task. And so should we put that in a committee? Should it be a task force again? What's the assignment? Is the assignment to come up with like a project plan of here's the cadence of events leading up to a decision point and then an actual 218?
Well, I think one of the struggles that, so there are a lot of things in there. I think we've been trying to put together that roadmap of put together, we had to have this before we were going to have another event, then we'll have the February meeting, we'll have that. The problem with the roadmap is that there are things like, there is a deadline. It's not July 1st, but we don't want to be July 1st, 2028, because we know, there's no like firm deadline. So we could do focus groups for 6 months, we could do it for 3 months, we could do it whatever. So I think this is part of the challenge in some ways, is how do we time box this and what is the right duration of which we intensify and go forward with. And if the board has thoughts on that, we can help use that as a benchmark on the end in some ways, because we don't have a.
Yeah, I guess I don't see that it needs to be protracted for another year. I mean, I don't see what would change.
I think there's a velocity and there's an urgency that we can only sustain for some period of time amongst the community, first of all. I think that there's a focus, there's a window that we're gonna have a focus for. We have starting that process right now. I would say in the next couple of months, we need to do all of the things that we're talking about. Does that sound reasonable? Is that in line with what you're thinking about or anyone else is thinking about?
Yeah, just most of the things we do here, we signed it. There's some committee assigned, or there's a name attached to it.
Well, it's been attached to communications, and that's been my
Okay.
assumption, is that we have our meeting next week. This is the main agenda item for next week, is to do this work, and we would be running that meeting on the 23rd and with Rick, and that's the plan is, and as we get this information, I've taken note, as part of that meeting, we'll put together that roadmap, and hopefully you're okay with us doing that as a next step without the full board, because that would be happening before the next board meeting, or we could have a board meeting before January 23rd if we had to. If the board wanted to review all of that, we could have a special meeting perhaps. But that would be my thought, is that
for the community wide. I'd go ahead with the community wide meeting, but then lay out what are the things you might want to do.
right. I think that's the idea.
Prepare for either a mock ballot, a ballot, or what the
Focus
rest of the
groups,
process
whatever it is. Yeah. And I think but I think you'll have to entrust us to take the feedback from today to say, here's a tentative roadmap of the types of things, including a focus group, including these sorts of sessions.
I'm personally good with that. Yeah.
Okay. Everyone else is okay with that, that's fine. Okay. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. Up and down.
We have a hand up. Sandy?
Yes, please. Thank you for calling that up. Go ahead, Sandy.
Hello, Sandy.
Hello, everybody. So I've been listening intently. First, I do agree with several of the board members. For sure, Bob, I do think that the focus group is a great idea, and this is a political process. And it needs to be handled that way. I also think that we need to have all of the data before we go to a community forum or a Zoom or whatever. I don't,
That's what we're doing.
I'd rather wait until we have everything and put together, a couple Zoom meetings if we're going to do a explanation kind of thing to people. And I'm okay being on the communication committee and helping draft this, but I do think that it needs to happen soon. People need to be aware of what's happening with the PUD or with the volunteer fire department, and they need to become informed completely. So I agree also that a survey would fail. Like this whole thing would fail if we put it to survey. People don't want to spend more money, is what I've heard when I've talked to people about this. So that's my comments for what it's worth.
So Sandy, you're proposing that we do not hold the January meeting that we had initially proposed, and you're proposing that we would hold off until the February board meeting has the information from the consultant and go forward with that?
Yes, I am. Because the first question people are going to ask in January is, well, how's it going to be allocated? What's it going to cost us? And so then we're going to have to do another meeting to explain it. So I'm in that camp of let's just wait, postpone the January meeting until a later date.
Thank you.
Well, let's say, so if we had the allocations in the February meeting, then it's not too long of a delay? Or you could have a community meeting?
I don't think the board fully realizes what it means to have allocations. Allocations are not going to be uniform. Every 4-bedroom, 2-bath is not going to have the same allocation. Every condo is not going to have the same allocation. So to say we're waiting on allocations assumes that we can say, oh, you have this kind of house, this is what you're going to be. That is not how 218 assessments work. So we would have specific, if Billy Joe Bob or Ricky Bobby raised their hand and said, I want my allocation, we could tell them, but I also don't want the community meeting to devolve into 300 people asking, well, what's mine? Well, what's mine? Well, what's mine? Because that's what it would be. So having allocations means something individually, it means nothing globally.
Eric, I know I've asked this in comms, but are we able, or will we be able to give sort of ballparks and say, well, if you have a home of this type, or if you have a condo in Meadows or Meadowstone, X, Y kind of thing, or is that not possible?
We could average things, but then people are going to rely on the average and
Or
say,
just
well,
give a
why is mine
range.
higher?
Well, I mean, what ultimately has to happen is there has to be an allocation done for every single
Parcel.
rest.
So no, I realize that's
So-
Derek's point.
So it's possible to do.
All right, so I think there are a couple of things. We've talked about this in communication as well. Like we can make just, distribution graphs. We can show what the distribution of things are. That's a plottable thing that we can show mathematically. I think we need to, whatever we do for going forward, we need a mechanism for someone to be able to log into their accounts, do something to find out what their actual number is, right? I mean, Eric, have we thought through what that would be, how we would do that?
The problem is there are multiple accounts assigned to a single APN in many cases. So you could say this parcel has this thing, but there may be 5 different things within that parcel. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's talk Mountain Club. They have a commercial area. They have a commercial area with multiple different things, but there's also the common area, but then there's the boilers, but and then, oh yeah, there's the residential electric meter, but there's only one propane meter that does the commercial and the residential. It's not as simple as I'm hearing it being spoken about.
Well, no, I don't want to imply that it was.
No,
For us to be able to bill for it, it's gonna have to be done
Yeah, just
sooner or later. So,
Yeah.
and to get it to pass, if you can't tell people what it's gonna cost them, it's gonna be harder to get it.
Yeah.
I would rather have people log into either a portal or their KMPUD account and be able to click on and get that number. Because then they would have actual data.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they would get that
You
app.
might get more signups for KMPUD.com
And
because people want to know what they're gonna have to pay.
Eric,
And then they would know, I mean, every parcel owner in theory should know what their parcel is.
after a
And
218. Is that right?
No, this is
No,
this is
this is-
to understand before we do
Yeah,
a
this would
vote,
be before.
how much you would, so what we're
We can
saying is that
upload it.
the numbers are
Bob
gonna
has
be different by person and parcel, and so we can upload these numbers into their account, so then that way, after, say, a meeting in February or January, someone, not January, but after February or
That's my
something,
point. I mean,
someone could log in and say, they talked about the assessment being the distribution of this, or here's blah, 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 blah. I'm going to be charged this.
but we can't give that number until we commit to the 218 and get the results. Isn't that true?
No, that's
no,
incorrect.
We had, the 218 will be sending people what their assessment's
Oh.
gonna be.
I thought that was the result.
And that's how the votes are counted as well.
I see.
There's
Some of
more
the vote,
weight
yes.
assigned to a larger assessment than a smaller
Chris,
assessment.
You're conflating engineer's assessment and 218. They're often interchanged, but not in this case. The
Oh.
engineer's assessment study is a standalone study that says this is how it could be allocated, how we recommend it based on our professional judgment. Board, if you want to do a 218 with this assessment
see.
that we developed, you can, but you're under no obligation to do
So
so.
we have to spend a certain amount to get an engineer's analysis
Which we've
that would
already done.
allow us to put this data out there. Then we spend further to get the 218.
Correct.
Then depending on the mood of the constituents, we might go forward with, we can make a decision.
We've already
Well, we can't,
paid for the engineering assessment.
we paid for the first part, we might pay for the
Phase
second
two.
part, and if the constituents
Okay.
don't vote for something, we don't have, there's no money to fund things.
I get
anymore.
it.
So there is no decision really at that point.
Yeah.
There is no mechanism to fund a fire department.
I get it. And when I asked about ranges, I mean, I just am assuming that people come to meetings like this and say, I just have a small, studio apartment. I don't want to pay the same amount for a fire department that some person with a big house,
And that's the
so if
assessment
you could
part.
say, well, apartments are like this, X to Y, and houses are, way different, and that would
Yeah,
at
I
least,
think
right.
At least the way the Amador one worked is the consultant helped explain with the fire department, with the chief. Here's how this is assessed, this is, for them, it was the type of the property, things like that, right?
Yeah.
The distance from the firehouse. They give you that algorithm, but in the end, what people would want to see is what's my allocation, right? Specifically, so that allows you to present some global information on what the scheme was. You could do some distributions and all that, but then in the
At the end of the day,
end,
they have to
an
log in and see their
individual
number.
parcel owner can say, this is gonna be $157 or whatever.
All right, so I think let's move along here. I want to make sure, let's think about next steps then. We've had a suggestion from our community that we should skip January and just wait till February.
I would leave that to the communications committee to decide.
Okay.
I'm fine either way, because there's two understandings. One is what are the proposals currently look like? What do they provide? And I thought Chief Winthrop did a really good job of covering that. And if the January 23rd just got everybody to watch that 40-minute explanation,
Just hit play on that.
that would be a
Actually,
huge,
not a bad idea.
that would be a huge benefit. And then, and we know that there's a scenario where that'll cost $1.5 million a year, of which $400,000 can come from property taxes. So the community's going to have to pay an extra 1.1 million a year. And in February, we could tell you exactly what your property's share of that will be.
Give you
But
instructions.
the
on how to
decision
vote.
about whether you want to have a fire department or not. Okay, that's one, and then the other is, can you afford it or not? I understand some people say we can't afford it.
And some people say they don't.
But I
want to.
do think but we have to start to build momentum with the knowledge. We'll have all the knowledge by the end of February. Then it's going to be a lot of one-on-one or focus meetings, so people understand and make sure they really understand what's going on. Because I think just saying, read this material, watch this video, and please vote. We don't agree that often, so the fact that we're agreeing is significant.
Right, so
Bob, could I just ask you to elaborate on focus groups? Just this concept that you have in, I like it, but we're going to be talking next week, I guess, in comms about this. It would be what, 3, 4, 5 times 6 people, 10 people? What do you have in mind?
Well, what John and I have
Would people
tried
raise
so
their hand and
far,
volunteer for it?
Yeah, I'll raise my hand and volunteer. If I have to call everybody individually, I will.
No, I mean with participants, like how would you recruit the, let's say,
I would-
30 people?
I would try to randomize it. And so I say, in groups of 10,
Groups of 10.
let's just pick out that number. On this date at this time, we'd like to do this. Here's the purpose of it. Would you be willing to participate?
Yeah.
Whatever. And if you only get 6 people, then go for, a few more. Get them together, do that 2 or 3 times, see what you learn.
So 2 or 3 sessions with one group of maybe 10 people is what you have in
And
mind.
then if that works, then I would try to do as many as possible.
Okay.
Because the more there are community members that understand it's
Yeah.
no fire department or properly trained, and which way we can save some money if you just don't want a fire department, tell us now. And we can save
Right.
some money. I don't know how to word it,
Yeah.
but that's part of what you get in a focus group is you find out what words matter to people, what's the best way to communicate.
I think that's a good one.
But that political process is how you get votes. That's the ground game. And I just think I would suggest that the politicians at this table are the ones that should be doing that. Because it is a political issue. We were the ones voted. How do you want me to vote in this board meeting?
Good point.
That's
Thank
one
you.
way to word it.
Yep.
But I don't know the best way to word it. You learn that by trying it once and then making it better the next couple of times.
Okay, so to wrap up, communications, we have a meeting next week. I want to keep this in communications. We can confirm or discuss in detail, but my suggestion to go forward with January.
Yeah, honestly, just to remind the board, the committees don't make the decisions, the board does. Poop or get off the pot if we're gonna have it on the 23rd. We're gonna have egg on our face if we cancel it, quite frankly, and look like we don't know what we're doing again. I'd rather not cancel, but
I would
it's
rather
this
not
board's
cancel.
decision, not communications committee decision,
That's
so.
I would rather not cancel just because I think there's enough material. And Sandy, I appreciate your comment, but I just think there's enough material that we can go through. And just even recapping the state of the world and what's changed in the last year is an hour's worth of conversation.
Just pressing play.
And also reminding people of Chief Withrow and everything like that, and to just get them lined up for what comes next and talk about that series of things that will come.
Yeah, and I love the idea, log in to see what your assessment is.
Yeah.
It might drive, I'm serious, it'll drive signups.
That's great. That's great. I love that.
Is everyone okay with moving forward?
We'll have to
January
look up
23rd?
Details on multiple accounts in an
The
AP.
more information we can
So I
get.
can talk offline.
Okay, yeah, we'll figure it out.
Bob, you okay with January 23rd?
I'm fine with it, yeah.
So we'll move forward with that. In that, we'll work on this roadmap. We'll talk about the focus groups as a next step. We'll try to do some randomized sampling, maybe from the database or something like that, where we can have us go out there into the community.
Yeah.
And go from there. Okay. Anything else for that? Otherwise,
So Rick, thanks for pulling all this together.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
move on to agenda item 10 on page 125. You're already there. Thank you. This is major project updates.
Did we just fold F and G together?
I think so.
Okay, I think so too. I just want to make sure no one wanted to talk about you.
Thank you.
Major projects. Updated major projects, we are currently waiting on the final draft of the propane master plan. That is coming. The water is still continuing on. The model has been calibrated though, so that is good. For
Sorry,
the
what's been calibrated?
model for the distribution system and well, we don't have a true transmission system, it's hybrid. The wastewater treatment plant is basically on hiatus right now, with only programming really going on behind the scenes. That. And I think for everything else is basically where we are. We have, as soon as the water master plan comes out, I have Hildebrand and Associates who did our last water wastewater rate study ready to go. With that, start that process for us as well. So we'll be talking at the next board meeting globally about any changes we want in the water wastewater study from a policy perspective. So we'll be doing that in February. And yeah, So everything's trucking along.
Okay, any
May I
questions?
ask, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask for yet another remedial on this chart. First off, the quarters are calendar, that's correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's why
Okay.
the years are. up above.
I understand, and Bob put this in the annual report. I think I understand roughly the status of the master plans, and you just summarized them: electric, propane, water, wastewater's on hiatus. But I'm not able to just map those to this visual. So, if you would indulge me, master plan water has one check next to it. It's in planning phase now. Yeah, that's consistent. We've been underway, I guess, for some time, like for at least last quarter we were. So water is in planning. I assume well building hardening is related to water, right? Or is
Yes.
that okay? So here we have a very specific action, a major a project, but it's checkered out in 2027, and it's obviously untethered from a master plan or not. I'm a bit confused about that. I could go on so wastewater looks like it's on hiatus, but we're going to start planning it again in this summer. So you can see I'm a bit confused. Can you help?
I don't know if I can or not. There's a lot there to unpack. So the things that are in the orange and yellow are more physical projects, while the blue are more ethereal projects. So the water, so the tank recoding, we know we have to do regardless of what the master plan says. We know we have to do that from a permitting perspective.
That's related to waste, right?
That's related to water.
Oh, sorry.
Water tank recoding.
Okay, yeah.
So that is a project we know we're going to do.
It's a current project. It was planned a while ago. It's budgeted.
Approved in the
It's just- yeah.
budget, correct.
Okay, and it's present
Yes.
tense.
So even though, it is peripherally related to the master plan, it's not contingent on the master plan.
Okay, got it.
Same with any of the other water projects. Those are all projects we think we need to do. And then once the master plan comes out, we may move things around date wise.
Oh, I
But
see.
this is based on the capital plan as approved by you and the rest of the board.
Yep.
In July.
Okay,
The wastewater master plan, the reason that's such a long planning period, in quarter 3 and a bit of quarter 4, we will be doing smoke testing and cameraing of all the lines so that we can do the master planning. Hopefully you do recall,
I
it's
do
a
recall we talked
$600,000
about those things,
nut
yes.
to do that work.
that was in CapEx.
Correct. So we believe we can do that in-house for cheaper. So that's what's going on. That's why that's a longer lead.
Okay,
And
the wastewater repair and maintenance makes total sense. We're doing that, of course. The direct burial project. The fact that I see 2 blue boxes in the second half of this year for an electric related, can we assume that ties to the electric master plan that we approved
yes, it
last
was
month?
recommended in the electric master
Okay,
plan. But
so
the planning aspect of that is going to be any CEQA documentation and or permitting we may need,
okay,
which would be prior to design.
okay. Propane first draft is being reviewed right now, so it makes
Final
sense.
draft is, they're making the final corrections right now.
Okay.
We've given them all our comments
I
2
see.
weeks ago.
I see. So it makes sense that there's one blue box. And thank you.
Just maybe 2 things that I'll work with Eric on is to maybe answer some of these questions again in the future. Maybe we'll put calendar year somewhere on here. And also just noting maybe grouping some of the rows into different services as some other way of doing that to highlight propane versus electric versus something else.
Before we leave though, could I ask
They are all grouped by service.
I know they are, but just
Okay.
making it really
Okay.
easy to
They
see.
are grouped by services, literally.
I know they are, but anyway,
could I ask about note number 2, which refers to capacity charges? I assume that's just for electric. Is that correct?
That's
Note number
correct.
2. Yeah, and then in November 2 years ago, what is this saying about November 22? I don't understand what the note is saying.
so September 25 surprises me there as a note. I would have thought that would have been a much older year, actually.
I think that coincides with the electric rate study.
Okay, so this is referring when it's useful, not when it was mentioned.
September 25 colon, consider capacity charge.
I see.
And that was brought up in November of 22, and then residential minimum payment. I don't have a
Oh.
date when that was brought up.
Okay.
I was just,
Anyway, these are suggestions that came through the electric rate study 4 years ago-ish.
Not the new current electric, I'm sorry, that was the rate study.
That's a rate study,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
different than
yeah,
master
yeah,
plan.
yeah.
So
Sorry.
these are all things that, I will take responsibility for some of this. Bob was very kind in listening to my feedback of putting like this together. And some of this was just to have us take notes. So when comments were made during rate studies, whatever it was, that we could capture some of these things. So then that way we have this document. So, hey, 4 years later, when we start a new rate study, was there anything that we needed to think about that we punted on or decided
Okay.
not against, that's what these notes are for. And just some of them are, at least. Like considering purchasing Rex for the metering that,
They are.
They all are. Yeah.
There are things, don't forget when you do the rate study, we wanted to talk about this.
Yeah.
Oh, so we will in the future be considering capacity charges, both residential and commercial.
It was a suggestion that we should do such a thing.
Consider, yeah, we should
and so we
definitely
will-
consider.
Not lose track of that as a suggested idea. and
Okay,
We'll, when that time comes.
thank you. Maybe, yeah, we could just indicate that that's what these notes are. There are things to remember at the next rate study.
Okay.
Thank you.
General manager's report.
we've pretty much covered everything. The only thing really left is I will be attending the CMU Legislative Days coming up a couple months. And then
When
I
are
have,
those? Do you know when those are gonna be?
oh yeah, I do. I have that. There's an
Okay.
Aqua one that I'm not going to because I have a conflict. There's a CMUA I am going to, so I can get you both dates, Bob.
Okay.
And then I've been continuing to participate in both the CMUA and the Aqua committees on the CARB EV mandate. It looks as though it's not going to affect us regardless of the rural exemption, even delayed, because we don't have any. They reduced the level of drayage that they were going to force these mandates on. So now it doesn't, basically, we don't have any heavy enough vehicles that it applies to us.
Eric, what is CMU and Aqua? Those are comfort.
California Municipal Utilities Association and Association of California Water Agencies. We also participate in CSDA, which is the California Special Districts Association, and SDRMA, which is
I know,
Special
I know that.
Districts Risk Management Agency.
I remember that you have a lot of those, yeah, so.
And I didn't get them all. I'm sure there's more. Oh yeah, AWWA, American Water Works Association.
And participate means that you and maybe, you attend, right?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I'm on
Sometimes speak.
various committees
Yeah.
here and there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No.
All right. Operations report.
For operations, snow removal's been busy the last week. Even though we actually lost an employee who got a bigger and better job, making a lot more than we could, double what we could offer. But we're excited for the employee who left us right at Christmas, but we were able to cover the loss and continue with some of the night shifts, which makes a big difference when you get up in the morning and want to try to get up on the hill. Tonight's no different. We have 3 guys here, hopefully can get here. The road's a mess out there if you can't figure it out already here. But we'll have a night shift as well as a 3 a.m. start for snow removal. And hopefully capture or take care of things before people show up tomorrow. It's going to be a busy weekend.
When you say covered that and lost employee, that means replace, you got a new person.
We're fully staffed again.
We're fully staffed again. And actually, one of our employees' fathers decided to come work for us. So he got brought on last week.
Thank you.
All equipment's up and running except for, well, they're all running. You're going to hear a noisy T5 out there. It's because it's got air getting into the fuel. So it sounds terrible, but it runs. And so hopefully they fix that today. But if you hear a really noisy little machine, that's what's going on there.
T5 is a trackless now.
It's a truck. It's a
Oh, really?
smaller, snow machine. But the crew did a good job dealing with, especially like in the commercial area where there's a lot of cars parked, trying to move around them. I didn't have any reports of damage, which I'm very pleased about. So we hope to continue that trend for the balance of the season.
Our brand new customer, KMA, or any indications from their HOA or from things
They're
going
happy.
well? They're happy?
Yeah, that's the feedback I get.
Good.
Um,
And we're not doing driveways. That's not been an issue, right? The fact that we limited what we would do this year, that's going well.
I have not heard any complaints for us not taking on the driveways and on the west side.
Good.
So. And I think the independent contractor out there has been able to keep up with the amount of snow that we received so far. But all in all, so far, snow removal is doing well. For propane,
Before we move on,
Yeah.
we changed our process this year, I believe, where we now have each HOA has representatives that contact the district instead of individual homeowners. How has that gone so far? Any complaints or concerns over that? And then just generally, I was going to ask more generally, any feedback that we've been receiving about snow removal from that process or otherwise?
seems like
It's 50-50. I
Yeah.
mean, there's some people who definitely, I think, feel entitled and want to call the district directly and not go through the proper channels. Just historically, that's how they've complained. But once they're gently reminded of the way to do it, they're okay. Carrie, maybe you could speak to that more.
Been very uneventful compared to last year this time. So I think it's working out well. And they do call, I say, hey, this is your contact. And
And I think also it's been good to have the HOA representatives, hear what's going on out there.
Sure.
I got a call last week from Larry Parker and KMA saying, hey, there's a couple of parking pads that were missed, and yeah, we missed them. We plowed the road, but the operator didn't see to come back and get that. And so we were able to take care of that as quickly as possible. And so I think it's been positive, the communication.
Do you notice homeowners using the sign up, the notification any more or less?
It's about the same.
92 people get the morning report
Yeah,
Yeah.
currently.
And is that a uptick or same as last year?
same.
Okay.
I didn't look at it last year.
I think we probably had about 80 something last year.
And as the season goes along, again, we've got some new operators, some driveway homeowners may not feel like we're doing the best possible service in the driveway, but we're doing it as best as we can with the operator and the skill and the equipment. As we go along, they'll get bigger, it'll get better and better, as it always does.
Yeah.
But that's my report for snow removal.
Thank you.
Solid waste, as you can imagine, this is a busy time for us. We have a new vendor. ACES is still the name of the company, but it's a larger corporation that's taken over ACES, as we reported before. The service still remains the same. However, it's been challenging for them to get here with holidays and so forth. But our crews have done a good job of crushing dumpsters and making room. The next tip is tomorrow morning. And if it's like last Saturday where they filled that giant truck up with all the trash they could, there may be a couple bins that'll be full, but we'll have plenty of room to get through the weekend, and people, I would imagine, the big exit on Sunday for folks going back home. Water's been doing really well. We've been keeping up with the aquifers. Thanks to the water staff for getting in a water sample last week on a Saturday when our normal testing company couldn't do the testing because of the holiday period. We actually sent an employee to South Lake Tahoe PUD to get the test done that was required by the end of the year, as well as the weekly monitoring. So that department's doing well. And then finally, electric propane, I think we're in pretty good shape there. The radiators as of yesterday, they were dug out, ready to go, just in case there's an emergency. We have the redundancy power, of course. But things are going good in that department. And then finally, fire department, circling back on that, we had 105 calls for 2024. And our average response time, was able to actually pull this out this year, was 7 minutes and 30 seconds for EMS, and the average for all calls for fire are about the same, about 7 minutes and 30 seconds.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, for volunteer fire department. Though I am a little suspect, sometimes my volunteers, they estimate the arrival time and maybe cook the books a little bit. Like you can't get to Tragedy Springs in 7 minutes.
Or you should.
You should.
You shouldn't.
But all in all, I'm pleased with the volunteers we have. We still have staffing shortages. There are still shifts that are missing. Christmas Eve, I was covering the valley from Gardnerville, because there were just no volunteers available. So we still have those issues, but I'm thankful for the volunteers we have and the hard work and dedication they're giving us. So that concludes my report.
Okay, any questions? Thank you, Rick. Standing committees, I'll start with finance, John.
We met on the 17th and covered audit and financials, and that was all reported here.
Great, thank you. Operations,
We're gonna meet next week, next Wednesday.
planning,
Planning is planning its report.
All right.
For a plan.
Yeah, so we'll now only have a single report going forward. Communications, the written report is in the packet there. As we discussed earlier, it's scheduled for January 23rd at 6 p.m. to have a community event. And as we discussed earlier, we will go with more items there. There are other items on the roadmap that we're going to start working on around the website in particular. Personnel, Bob?
So there are two items we talked about. One was we'll work on a proposal for the next budget cycle of how to cover employee access to the mountain. Since that has changed, if it was $621 per employee, we'd probably be an expense of about $11,000. So we're going to look at what's the best way to propose that, and we'll have something for the during the budget period. Then the other thing, there's an update on searching for employee housing appropriate for a family. It means 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and there just hasn't been anything showing up that's affordable yet, and so staff follows it regularly.
Great.
Those are the two items.
And then for information technology and cybersecurity, there's a written report just to the highlighting that the staff has a perfect record for identifying phishing attempts, and we continue to fix any challenges that we have with cybersecurity. We have a few items that we found that we're fixing. No temporary advisory committees.
I would just add one other thing. So I used to be a bank board officer, and the employees at the bank did not do as well as the employees here at KMPUD in terms of spotting phishing.
Oh.
So they are on the ball.
LAFCO did not meet. There are no temporary advisory committees for 14. And then number 15, general board discussion. Anyone who has any questions, ask for clarification, information to staff, anything like that. Any board discussion?
No.
All right, then 4:06, we will adjourn today's meeting. Thanks everyone for attending.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.